Azure Cost Optimization, SMB Savings Strategies. This article covers Microsoft Azure Cost Optimization for SMBs. Understanding how Azure pricing works for small businesses. Before you can optimize anything, you need a clear picture of how Azure charges you. The platform uses a consumption-based model where you pay for compute, storage, networking, and services as you use them. That flexibility is genuinely useful for unpredictable workloads. The problem is that same flexibility means costs can creep up without warning. Azure pricing varies by several key factors. Region: running resources in East US is often cheaper than West Europe for the same workload. Service tier: a standard tier VM costs significantly more than a basic tier with similar specs. Licensing model: pay-as-you-go, reserved capacity, and spot instances all carry different price points. Data egress: transferring data out of Azure carries a per GB charge that many SMBs overlook. The Microsoft Azure pricing calculator is worth bookmarking. Use it before provisioning anything new, especially databases and virtual machines. If you're still weighing platform options, our detailed breakdown of Azure versus AWS versus Google Cloud, best pick for SMBs, explains which platform suits which business profile. What happens when your Azure startup credits run out? This scenario creates real pain in startup communities. Microsoft offers free credits through the Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub program, up to $150,000 in Azure credits depending on your stage. When those credits expire, your workload doesn't pause. It keeps running, and billing starts immediately on whatever payment method is on file. Here's what typically unfolds. Unoptimized resources stay live. Dev environments, test databases, and staging servers that were cheap to run on credits become real line items. Storage costs accumulate silently. Blob storage, disk snapshots, and log retention all add up even when no compute is running. Notification gaps catch teams off guard. Many founders set up Azure infrastructure during the credit period without ever configuring billing alerts. The transition from startup credits to paid billing is exactly where post-startup credit cloud strategy matters most. You need to audit what's running, right-size it, and implement cost controls before the first real invoice arrives, not after. Our guide on Reduce Cloud Costs with Microsoft Azure, a startup guide, covers this transition in detail for teams going from zero to production billing. Microsoft Azure Cost Optimization Strategies that actually work. Microsoft Azure Cost Optimization for SMBs comes down to a handful of repeatable practices. None of these require a dedicated FinOps team. They do require discipline and a clear ownership model for cloud spending. Right-size your virtual machines. VM sizing is the single biggest driver of wasted Azure spend for small businesses. Most organizations provision VMs at the size they think they'll need under peak load, then run them at 20 to 30% utilization the rest of the time. Azure Advisor identifies underutilized VMs and recommends downsizing automatically. Check your VM utilization metrics over a 30-day window. If average CPU usage sits below 20% and memory below 40%, you're almost certainly over-provisioned. Shut down non-production resources. Dev, test, and staging environments don't need to run 24 hours a day. Use Azure Automation or Azure DevOps pipelines to schedule shutdowns during nights and weekends. For a standard 8-hour workday, 5 days per week, that's approximately 128 hours weekly when non-production VMs can be off. That's roughly 72% of the week where you're not paying for dev infrastructure. Use spot instances for interruptible workloads. Azure Spot VMs offer discounts up to 90% off pay-as-you-go rates for workloads that can tolerate interruptions. Batch processing, rendering jobs, data transformation pipelines, and non-critical analytics all fit well here. Spot instances aren't right for production web apps or databases, but for background jobs they're a practical cost lever. Enable autoscaling. Static infrastructure is expensive infrastructure. Configure Azure scale sets for web applications so compute capacity adjusts with actual traffic. An SMB with traffic peaking during business hours and dropping overnight can save considerably by letting Azure scale down automatically rather than holding constant capacity. Azure reserved instances versus pay-as-you-go, which saves more for SMBs? Azure reserved instances let you pre-purchase compute capacity for 1 or 3 years in exchange for significant discounts. According to Microsoft's official reservations documentation, reserved instances can save up to 72% compared to pay-as-you-go pricing for the same VM. The trade-off is commitment. You're paying for capacity whether you use it or not. Pricing model discount versus PAYG commitment. Best for pay-as-you-go 0% non-variable or unpredictable workloads, 1 year reserved up to 40%, 12 months stable workloads you'll definitely need, 3 year reserved up to 72%, 36 months core production infrastructure, spot instances up to 90% non-interruptible. Batch jobs and background processing for most SMBs. The right answer is a hybrid model. Reserve capacity for stable production workloads, web servers, databases, app services running constantly, while keeping dev and test environments on pay-as-you-go or spot instances. We cover the reserved instance decision in depth at reduce cloud costs by 40% with Azure reserved instances, including a framework for identifying which of your workloads qualify. Using Azure cost management tools to monitor SMB spend. Azure Cost Management Plus Billing is Microsoft's native tool for tracking, analyzing, and controlling cloud spend. It's included at no additional cost for Azure subscribers, and most SMBs significantly underuse it. Key features to start using now. Budgets and alerts. Set a monthly budget at the subscription, resource group, or service level. When actual or forecasted spend reaches 80% or 100% of budget, Azure sends an email notification. Cost analysis. Slice your spending by resource, tag, region, or time period to find where money is actually going. Advisor recommendations. Azure Advisor analyzes your usage and flags underutilized resources, unattached disks, and misconfigured services. Anomaly detection. Cost management can flag unusual spending spikes automatically, which helps catch runaway jobs or misconfigured scaling rules before they become expensive. One underused practice: tag every resource with at minimum a, and tag. When you can filter cost analysis by versus, identifying unnecessary spend becomes far simpler. According to Microsoft's Azure Cost Management Best Practices documentation, organizations that implement structured cloud cost governance consistently reduce waste. For an SMB spending $5,000 per month on Azure, improving governance can realistically save $1,000 to $1,500 monthly. Cloud security for SMBs on a tight Azure budget. One concern that surfaces every time cost optimization comes up: does cutting costs mean cutting security? The honest answer is no, but it requires intentional choices. Azure includes several security services at no cost or very low cost. Microsoft Defender for Cloud, free tier, provides security posture scoring, misconfiguration alerts, and compliance tracking at no additional charge. The free tier alone addresses a significant number of SMB security gaps. Microsoft Entra ID, formerly Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication for up to 50,000 users, is available on the free tier. MFA is the highest impact security control most SMBs can implement. Azure Policy, enforce governance rules across your subscription automatically, such as requiring encryption at rest or blocking public IP creation without approval. Role-based access control, RBAC, assign least privilege permissions to team members and service accounts. This costs nothing and prevents a meaningful percentage of cloud security incidents. The area where cutting corners genuinely hurts is logging and monitoring. Azure Monitor and Log Analytics have a free tier, but for production workloads you want enough log retention to investigate incidents properly. That cost is worth keeping. For businesses in regulated industries, our guide on how to automate banking compliance on Azure covers how to maintain audit readiness without a full compliance team. Common Azure cost mistakes SMBs make. Understanding what not to do is as useful as knowing best practices. These are the patterns that appear repeatedly across SMB Azure accounts. Leaving unattached disks running. When you delete a virtual machine, Azure does not automatically delete the attached managed disks. Those disks keep accruing storage charges. Azure Advisor flags unattached disks, but many teams never act on the recommendations. A monthly sweep to identify and delete orphan disks takes about 15 minutes and often saves hundreds of dollars. Ignoring data egress charges. Ingress, moving data into Azure, is free. Egress, moving data out, is not. Teams that replicate data across regions or pull large datasets to on-premise systems for analysis can accumulate egress costs that rival compute costs. Review your architecture to minimize unnecessary data movement, and use Azure CDN where appropriate to reduce egress from origin servers. Provisioning in expensive regions. By default, East US and West US tend to be among the least expensive Azure regions. Some teams deploy to West Europe or Southeast Asia out of convenience and pay 10 to 15% more for the same resources. If your users are primarily in one geography, align your primary region to the nearest low-cost option. Not using Azure Hybrid benefit. If your organization holds existing Windows Server or SQL Server licenses with software assurance, Azure Hybrid benefit lets you apply those licenses to Azure VMs, saving up to 40% on compute costs. Many SMBs with legacy on-premise infrastructure are eligible and never realize it. How to transition from free Azure tier to a cost-effective paid plan. Moving from free Azure credits to paid billing is a structured process, not just a billing switch. Race a practical sequence. Audit your current resources. Export a full list of everything running in your subscription. For each resource, document its purpose, current size, and whether it's production or non-production. Categorize by criticality. Separate what must stay running from what can be shut down, resized, or archived. Right-size before the billing switch. Downsize VMs, clean up unattached disks, and delete unused resources before the first real invoice arrives. Set up budgets and alerts. Configure spending alerts at 80% and 100% of your expected monthly budget before the billing cycle starts. Evaluate reservation candidates. Any workload that ran consistently throughout your credit period is a strong candidate for a 1-year reserved instance. Pick the right support plan. The developer plan, $29 per month, suits most SMBs starting out. You don't need Premier support until your Azure footprint grows significantly. For teams going through a broader migration, our Azure Migration Services for Businesses, a beginner's guide walks through the full lifecycle from planning to go-live. Conclusion. Microsoft Azure cost optimization for SMBs is an ongoing practice, not a one-time configuration. The businesses that manage their Azure spend well don't necessarily have bigger teams or bigger budgets. They have better habits, consistent resource tagging, regular advisor reviews, right-sizing before provisioning, and treating cloud billing as an operational expense that deserves active management. Start with the fundamentals. Audit what's running, set budget alerts, and identify your top 5 cost drivers. From there, work through reservations for stable workloads, autoscaling for variable ones, and the security controls that cost little but protect a lot. In 2026, with Azure pricing and tooling more mature than ever, SMBs have no shortage of options to run lean without running at risk. If you'd like help designing a cost-optimized Azure architecture or need support transitioning from startup credits to a production-ready paid plan, our team at Q Services is here to help. Get in touch today.